is Satya, and in this video I'm going to quickly take you through my actual experience of the CLAT 2015. CLAT 2015, conducted by the Ram Manohar Lohia National Law University, had a number of changes as compared to the previous editions. This was the first time that the paper was conducted online. What was hitherto an OMR sheet pen and pencil based test was not to be attempted on a computer. So on the day of the examination, I went to my test center, and when the clock struck 3, the online test started. My very first thing was to go through the entire paper and check out what is the overall look and feel. The English section had the standard reading comprehension, vocabulary and grammar based questions. Math seemed a bit tough. The reasoning section seemed to follow the general pattern of the previous years. The GK section seemed pretty standard, and the legal aptitude section also included questions on legal awareness. So what I'm going to do is run the paper on the screen and show you what my thought process was. Now this paper would be taken in the linear fashion, one question after the other, but in the actual test I often jumped between these sections, right? I'll tell you my entire thought process in a nutshell at the end. But let me take you through the questions in brief. So the first section that we see here is the English section, where the first few questions were something new this year, where you were given a set of sentences where two words can replace a single one, and you had to select the set of words that was correct. So this was a bit typical, but very much doable. The next few questions were choosing the correct alternative to replace the underlined part. There did not seem to be much of a problem in this section as well. The next was reading comprehension. Now, although the passage was not very large, they seemed a bit dicey, and as is my usual nature, I did not attempt the questions of reading comprehension till I had completed all the other sections before. Some of the questions on fill in the blanks were pretty simple, and it was very easy to get the right answers. Again, a reading comprehension passage which was a bit typical but not very difficult to solve, because most of the answers seemed pretty obvious. Some questions were based on your knowledge of vocabulary. Questions of synonyms were pretty easy, and it was not difficult to get the right answer. Questions on analogies were also not very difficult to understand. Now, there were certain questions in which you had to identify the incorrect sentence from a group of 4 different sentences. Again, this was not very difficult to understand. Questions were based on idioms and phrases or word meanings, where a specific meaning was given and then you had to identify what it was. So the English section was decent, but it took some time to understand what exactly was to be done in that section, and so I could attempt this in 2 different goes. The general knowledge and current affairs seemed to have a lot of questions which were current affairs of the month of January, February and March. So students who would have diligently prepared their current affairs could have easily breezed through this. Because I am not an active candidate for CLAT, my preparation for general knowledge and current affairs was pretty much nil. So based on my regular habit of newspaper reading, I was able to attempt some of the questions, right? So my final score in this section was not too great, but again I just spent 15 to 17 minutes in completing this section. Mathematics was very typical in CLAT 2015. While some of the questions were pretty straightforward and basic application of fundamental knowledge was enough to clear them, some of the questions were very typical and seemed more of a postgraduate entrance exam level than for students who are appearing for an undergraduate entrance examination. Surprisingly, there were 5 questions based on data interpretation as well, where a graph was given, a chart was given tabular data was given, and based on this table, students had to answer some questions. But again, if your knowledge of averages, percentages and ratio proportion of mathematics was good enough, it was not difficult to crack all of them. So mathematics again took me about 20 to 25 minutes, and here I must admit I wasted some time because I could have simply skipped those questions and moved ahead, but my ego came in between for about 5 minutes and I wasted those precious moments. The next section was legal awareness and aptitude. While the legal aptitude questions were pretty much standard and most of the questions could be found across various preparatory material, the questions of legal awareness were not that difficult if one was regularly in touch with current affairs in popular media. So although this section was not as per expectations, one could have easily done this section in about 25 to 30 minutes. So then moving ahead, there were certain questions which required you to know basic terms, right? So vote on accounts and stuff like that could have been solved by a person who knows the basics of law. Logical reasoning, the next section, was a bit typical. In this section, there were a few questions of relations, few questions of counting the letters in a given word and arranging them, a set of questions of coding and decoding, which actually was pretty simple, but one of the options in question number 5, that is the fashion question, seemed a bit wrong. And in fact, there were multiple options. In fact, there was a question in which 2 options were pretty much the same. Fact, judgment and inference made its appearance in this paper. Not very difficult. Again, coding and decoding made its appearance as a separate set. There were questions on syllogisms, very standard questions and very easy to solve. The puzzle question, especially this one, where you are given some data in terms of wrong answers, blank answers, was very difficult to solve. In fact, I struggled with this question for quite some time, and at the end of the paper I almost gave it up, right? I marked one answer in this and got it wrong. So it would have been advisable to leave that particular question. Then there was another set of questions in which friends were exchanging items and based on the price. Again, it was not worth solving this entire puzzle. I managed to solve it at the end and got 3 right and 1 wrong. But then those 3 questions which I got right made hardly any difference. The next section, in fact, most of the questions were done by now, and it was not very difficult to do the easy ones. The tough ones, on the other hand, were extremely tough and could not be solved. So as per my game plan, I had started with the general knowledge section. Now I'm going to tell you how I went through this paper. As per my game plan, I started with the general knowledge section, and a lot of questions on current affairs were concentrated on the months of Jan, Feb, March of 2015, right? So after attempting these questions that I felt I knew the answers to, I shifted to English. Few questions were ambiguous in the wording, answers to a few seemed suspicious, and normally I would complete the entire section minus reading comprehension and jumble passages. But in this case, I purposely left a lot of questions where I had to think and moved on to maths. Under normal circumstances, I could crack 20 questions of mathematics in less than 15 minutes. But in this paper, I could hardly attempt 10 odd questions in about 15 to 20 minutes. So here is where my strategy had to forcibly kick in. Keeping my ego aside, I moved ahead with reasoning. Questions based on coding, relations, directions and others were easily handled. But then the puzzles were of a difficult level, which was totally unexpected in this exam. The legal aptitude section was what I ended up with, and the questions based on principles and facts were very easy, but the legal awareness question stumped me to the core. Now, after attempting a couple of dozen questions in this section, I stopped to check my progress in the paper when I realized that I had just under an hour left and my number of attempts had barely touched the 3-digit mark. I had not even completed or attempted half the questions. So having gone through all the sections once, it was now simply a game of Russian roulette. Randomly jumped between sections and attempted questions which I could, and there was no method to my madness. After a lot of sweat and toil, I finally reached an attempt of 168 questions. With 5 minutes to go in the paper, I finally lost my patience and I stopped attempting any further. Once this exam was over, I came out of the center and was mobbed by my students who had similar experiences to mine. There was a lot of moans and curses about the toughness of the math and reasoning section, the unexpected emergence of legal awareness questions, and the overall inability to attempt many questions. So I predicted that the students who had attempted too many questions might not actually end up with a good score, whereas students who were restrained and attempted only those questions that they were confident about would actually do well. My first prediction on that day was regarding the overall cutoffs, and that was that they would drastically be reduced as compared to the previous editions of the exam, and I stood vindicated. The highest score was 140 plus in this examination, and my score of about 116.75, and this I'm talking is the unrevised score because there was an increase of 2.5 marks after that, but my initial score 116.75, which previously would not have been enough to get admission to any national law university, was adequate to actually crack the NLSIU Bangalore cutoff. In the end, after the first scoring, my score in English was 27.5, in GK was 15.25, mathematics was 14.5, legal was 34, and logical reasoning was 25.5, with a grand total of 116.75. And this, in such a typical and tough paper, was enough to secure me the All India rank of 52. So as you can see, if you are not particularly good at any one of the sections, in my case GK, you can still get a decent score if you do well in the others. However, it is my long-term experience that a student who can score well in general knowledge and current affairs is someone who can be guaranteed admission into a good national law university. Remember, basic English, logic, legal and mathematics are areas in which most students who have prepared well do on a similar level. So it is the general knowledge and current affairs section which makes a difference. This was my experience of CLAT 2015, a paper which was not at all typical. Let's hope that this experience of mine would help you prepare well for different sections and get admission into your dream national law university. Wish you all the best. Have a good day.